So in this video, I am going to review the 3 ways to solve quadratics. First way that we learned was solving by factoring. Then we learned how to solve by completing the square. And then we finished up by using the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic function. So let's start off with solving by factoring. So by factoring. So factoring is a great way to solve, but you have to be able to factor the quadratic. So for example 1, here we go. Example 1. So let's say we had 14n squared minus 70 equals negative 7n. All right, so when we solve by factoring, first thing that we have to do is get the equation set equal to 0. So we need this to equal 0 on this side. So what we need to do is get rid of this. So to get rid of negative 7n, we need to add 7n. So that is going to, if we put this in the correct order, go right in the middle. Now we need to factor. So remember, when we factor, first thing we do is look for GCF. So all of those can be divided by 7. So we take out a 7. That would leave 2n squared plus n minus 10. Now we have a trinomial. This trinomial has a leading coefficient. So if we go over here to the side, if you like to do the x to figure this out, we need factors of negative 20 that add up to 1. So if you remember in class, I gave you a hint that if you need to get a 1 as the sum, then you know you're dealing with two numbers that are right next to each other. So numbers that are next to each other that multiply to be negative 20 would be 5 and negative 4. Remember, we had a leading coefficient here, so reduce that back down by 2. And this one's negative 2. That one doesn't reduce. So now we go back over here. We have 7. And then this one, the 5 halves, is going to become 2n plus 5. And this negative 2 is going to become n minus 2 equals 0. And then remember, you can always check your work by multiplying it all back together. So if we FOILed this back together, we would get this line. And then if we distributed the 7, we would get this. All right, so now when we solve by factoring, we're trying to figure out what n equals. So we need to finish this off. So we set each part equal to 0. So that equals 0, and this one equals 0. There's no variable here, so we can just cross that off. This one we need to add 2, so n equals 2. This one we need to subtract 5 and then divide by 2. So there are our 2 solutions for that one. So that's solving by factoring. So get it equal to 0, factor it, solve it to get your 2 solutions. All right, let's move on to completing the square. I love completing the square as an alternative to, sorry about the barking dog, as an alternative to factoring. So this is completing the square. The deal with completing the square is that it's not ideal if your middle term is odd. I know that fractions are not loved by everyone, but it's still absolutely possible. So let's see. For this one, let's do, how about, so here's example 2, sorry. Let's do 3x squared plus 12x minus 18 equals 6. So just to change it up a little bit. All right, so when we do completing the square, what we do is we basically get it equal to 0, and then we know that this number is not the right number for the job. But in this case, it's not really worth it. So I think we should just go ahead and start by moving the 18 to the other side. So that would give us 3x squared plus 12x equals 24. All right, so now we're going to go through and complete the square. We have a leading coefficient, so we need to pull that out. So if we take that out, that's going to leave us x squared plus 4x plus blank. equals 24 plus blank. All right, got to figure out what is the number that goes in this spot. So we need to take half of this and square it. So half of 4 is 2, squared is 4. But when we go over to this side, we're not just adding 4, we're actually adding 12. All right, so over here, now we can factor this. And this is going to be x plus 2 squared. The right side we get 36. Now we need to solve for x, because remember our ultimate goal here is to find out what does x equal. So first we need to divide both sides by 3. That takes care of that. So we have x plus 2 squared equals 12. Next step is take square root of both sides. So when we take the square root of something that's squared, we get what we started with. On this side, anytime we take the square root, there is a positive or negative value of that. This is going to be square root of 12, but I know I can simplify square root of 12. We can split that into 4 and 3. So that would be 2 root 3. So now just to finish, x gets by itself, we need to subtract 2 from both sides. So negative 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 3. And remember we said early on, I told you that this exponent, the highest exponent, is going to tell you how many solutions you have. Some of them can be duplicated, but what this is actually 2 solutions. Now we can leave our answer like that, but just to remind you that what this means is that we have negative 2 plus 2 square root 3 and negative 2 minus 2 square root 3. So we do actually have 2 answers. And then we could estimate what the square root of 3 is as a decimal and work it out, but we don't need to. So those are going to be our solutions. And again, you can write your answer just like that. All right, so that is solving by completing the square. All right, next up, let's solve with quadratic formula. All right, so quadratic formula is its own monster equation. We learned the song for the quadratic formula. So by the quadratic formula. All right, so here we go. Example 3. Let's do 3m squared plus 4m minus 5. So we'll just do 3, 4, 5. All right, so quadratic formula, hopefully you remember. We'll write that up at the top, I guess. So to figure out what the variable is, in this case it's m, but in general we say x. Yikes, there's something on my marker. So the formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and all of that is divided by 2a. So that is the formula for quadratic formula, or that's the equation, sorry, for quadratic formula. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our values here. So we can see that a is 3, b is 4, c is negative 5. And we're going to fill it in. Here we go. So m equals, all right, negative b is going to be negative 4 plus or minus square root. B squared would be 16. And this is where you have to be careful because we're doing minus 4ac. So that means negative 4 times 3 times negative 5. So you just need to be careful when you do that. So that looks to me like it's going to be a positive 60. And then all of that is over 2a, which is 6. All right, after that initial step, now we're just doing order of operations. So we have negative 4 plus or minus. This is going to be the square root of 76 over 6. All right, now we need to look and see. We know 76 isn't perfect, but let's see if we can reduce it by a perfect square root. And I'm pretty sure 4 goes into 76. So this would be 4 times 19. So that's going to be 2 root 19. And then we have a triangle right here that we need to check. And if we can reduce all of those by the same amount, then we need to. So all those can be reduced by 2. So that's going to give us -2 plus or minus square root of 19. And all of that is over 3. And again, we have 2 answers right here because we have -2 plus the square root of 19 over 3. And then -2 minus the square root of 19 over 3. So those are your 2 solutions for that one. And again, we could estimate the square root of 19 and then as a decimal and then work it out, but it's not worth it. It's not that important for what we're doing. So we can call ourselves done with that one. All right, so again, just to recap, we have 3 ways to solve quadratics. All right, factoring, which is awesome. Factoring is very fast, it's quick, it's pretty easy, and if you're good at factoring, I would think that you would enjoy that one the best. Then we have completing the square. Completing the square works for any type of quadratic. The problem is if you have an odd number as that middle term, you're going to end up using fractions, which is not a problem. You can still do it, but I know some of you would prefer that. And then the last one is quadratic formula. Quadratic formula always works. It's not my favorite, and it's not my favorite for you guys because that -4ac causes a lot of trouble. You know, making sure you get the right sign, multiplying the numbers, combining them together. So sometimes that one worries me a little bit for you guys, but those are your 3 options. These 2 always work. So those 2 will always work. Factoring only works if you can factor it. So if you need to watch the video again, please do. I also have the separate videos on each individual type. If you're struggling with one type, you can go and rewatch that video for the specific type as well. And good luck.